Hi everyone, welcome to our second module in the course, The Social Impact of Technology. I hope you're having a great week so far. Nothing too new to report here. The doggos are having a rest, as you can see. There we are. In the background, there's Miss Rosie having an afternoon snooze, and Poppy is in her crate, in her little bedroom, having a nap after her playtime. A lot of biting. Oh my word. So, this little introduction is meant to give you an overview of what you are going to be doing in the upcoming module. So the module itself is looking at the ways in which we can evaluate technology. So last module, you were considering how it is that we define and describe technology, and as some of you have reached out to me saying that it was a fairly provocative and interesting exercise for many of you. For me as well, I find every time that I start thinking about my assumptions and biases about technology, things seem to become more enriched the more I think about it. So I think that's kind of exciting. So last time you took a look at 6 replies to the question of what is technology, and you got to know a couple of key terms like technological determinism and social construction theory, and what that means for a definition of technology. So we're going to be using those more this time around. For this module, for the next 2 weeks, you are going to be focusing on the question of how it is do we evaluate technology. So we have maybe our own definition hammered out a little bit. So now it's time to think about how we go about evaluating what is good and bad about the technologies that make up our past, present, and future. So to do this, we are going to be doing 2 things. We're first going to be taking a look at questions about the control of technology. Because in order to understand how we can come to give it positive and negative designation, we need to understand a little bit more about how social, political, cultural, and economic and environmental aspects of these technologies kind of come together to create a system of control for these technologies. So you are going to be engaging that. So you're going to be taking a look at questions about organizational structure, as well as bigger forces such as technocracies, the ways in which governments can both support or limit technological advancement and development. And you're also going to take a look at the role that democracy and consumerism play in the shaping and control of technologies. So that'll be the first part. The second part is the fun part. This is where you are going to be given a really handy model that you can use. It's a conceptual model, but it comes in a visual format. And the aim of the model is to help you organize your thinking about how to describe the positive and negative impacts of any technology. And then you will get an opportunity to practice these things. So it's kind of an exciting week. I'm a little excited for you. So that is enough of kind of this overview introduction. Let's turn now to the business, and we will chat a little bit about upcoming assignments and what is going on next. So without further ado, enjoy the show and have fun learning about how to evaluate technology. All right, see you in a little bit. Hey folks, welcome to the business of Module 2 on evaluating technology. So in this section, we are going to take a look at just these things right here. A little bit of housekeeping stuff, things that you should know about that are upcoming and going to be on your plate very soon. So let's take a peek. So I wanted to touch base and remind you that you have a few upcoming assignments in weeks 4, 6, and 7. So as you well know, and you probably have already started thinking about your proposal for your seminar. So that is coming up. It is due Friday, February 12th. And all of the instructions and instructional video is already posted for you, so you're welcome to start. And you can hand it in anytime before the deadline for this assignment, which the deadline is printed on the assignment instructions. So you'll find all of that in the assignments and tests link on our main menu on Blackboard. The next thing that's coming up is in week 6. So due on Friday, February 26th is another 2.5% quiz. So you've had one so far. You can see that it's not too bad. And much in the same vein, you will be answering multiple choice questions. You'll have 3 attempts. I take your top score out of the 3. So nothing new to report there, but just a heads up. And the next bit of business is the midterm. So I know it's really early, we just started the course, and here I am talking about the midterm, but it's never too early to start thinking about how you want to best organize all of your notes from these lectures and the notebooks in the class. So I would recommend keeping a notebook per course and handwrite things out. The reason why handwriting is better for your mind is because your mind actually has to pay more attention to translating the words to movement. So if you are able and you really want to do well, handwrite your notes out as often as possible. I know that this is an ask for some of us because we're so used to typing things out and keeping things neatly on a screen. But scientific studies do indicate that we learn and retain more information and more new information when we handwrite. So that's a little tip that I will offer you at this time. And there will be more information about the midterm coming up in the following weeks, including a study guide. So I do let you know how the midterm is composed and what you can expect to see on it, and some tips on how to review. But right now, if you wanted to start nice and early by getting your notes written out, you're going to be ahead of the game. So the second piece that I wanted to mention in the business is our notebooks. I do want to reiterate again that participation in the notebooks is mandatory so this semester, and you will be earning up to 15% of your final grade by interacting with our notebooks on a regular basis. And while there is sort of a one due date set in our calendar, it is something that you are expected to do as you go along. So what is happening, and it's worth repeating, at the end of each module, I will be going through the notebooks and looking at and giving your participation and evaluation. So the more regularly you can do this, the easier this will be. But I do want to emphasize that this is mandatory for you to be participating in, so get to it as soon as you can. And finally, just a few reminders, because I am still getting emails from students about things like, when are things due, or what topics is coming up in this course. And this indicates to me that maybe some of you have not found our course documents. And there are two that are really important to the course. The first is the syllabus. The second is the course calendar. The syllabus gives you a grand overview of what it is that we're covering in this course and how we're going to do it. The course calendar is the most important document for this class. It contains the lecture and module schedules, it contains the assignment schedule, and the deadlines for when things are due. So you are definitely going to want to save that to your computer and or print it out and keep it nice and neat. You will find these documents in the About Course link. So on our main menu on Blackboard, click on About Course, and that is where you will find these documents. And if you haven't done so yet, in the same place where you will find these documents are some course tour videos. I highly recommend that you watch these videos. They take you on sort of the grand tour of, what does the scheduling look like? How do the pieces of this course fit together? So you can go and watch these and view them over and over again, and then email me your questions. So I just wanted to reiterate that as well. So from here on in, we are going to start the proper lecture. So at this time, you can follow along with the PDF of these lecture slides. And I'm going to turn myself off so you can devote yourself to looking at the slides and taking your notes as I'm chatting away. So that's it for me for this little segment. So what's going to happen now, you're going to jump into a review of what you did last week and how it connects to our topic this week. All right. Stay tuned. I did want to take a moment to review one particular set of things that we covered in last week's lecture and module. So if you recall, last week we took a kind of a big grand view to the study of technology, and we asked the question, what is technology? And we looked at 6 different responses to that central question. We covered a bunch of keywords, and we looked at some of the assumptions that we make about technology, like it being progressive and futuristic and helpful and efficient. But one thing that I really want for us to bear down on is the distinction between 2 ideological terms that are really going to help us out as we make our way through analyzing different kinds of technologies throughout the course. And it's this difference between technological determinism and social constructivist theories. So what I've done, you're probably wondering, why is there this image from the movie WALL-E, and is this Janet from the television show The Good Place? Yes, it is. What I want us to do, I'm using these as examples of these different theories. So let's pop over to our learning notebook, and what I've done is used these, a movie and a television program, 2 of my at least top 10 favorites, maybe even my top 6 favorite programs of all time, as ways for us to
find examples of these theories. And these sorts of theories are really tricky. I was reminded of this yesterday as my husband and I were sitting down having a cup of tea and trying to think of movies or television shows that I could use to help you understand these abstract ideas. And I'm going to tell you, we both really had to think hard about how to articulate this and finding the right examples. So they have it. Even profs have to really work sometimes to understand theories, and that is absolutely okay. But turning now to our theories. So if you recall from last week, we dipped our toe in these theoretical waters and thought a little bit more about technological determinism. And technological determinists tend to believe that technology is a force that shapes human and changes human behavior. So the example here from the film WALL-E, and you're highly encouraged to take a look at the clip in a few moments when I give you a chance to pause and take a look. But the important thing to take away from this is that the world of the humans who are on this spaceship, they are essentially refugees from planet Earth, and the technology that they have on their spaceship basically dictates their life. They are fed lots of sugary, yummy things. They have technology that moves them around. If you notice here, there's little screens in front of their faces where they can be constantly intellectually stimulated and entertained. But you'll notice something very particular. The biological result of these technologies has been to get quite obese. And when you watch the clip, you'll see sort of how this technologically deterministic idea is expressed. It's quite funny and entertaining. So that's that one. Now, for those of you who are Good Place fans, I know I'm definitely one. How could I not be? A show about philosophy. Social constructivism can be best articulated by the character Janet in the show. And if you've seen the show, it's a very complicated show about a group of humans who, after their death, are sent to the good place, and adventures ensue. And one of the main characters is this character here, Janet. Janet is not a human. Janet appears as a human being in the good place in order to make the humans who are there more comfortable. She is a supercomputer and all-knowing knowledge machine, and she's merely taking the anthropomorphic form of a human woman as she helps and serves all of the people in the good place. But what's really interesting as you watch the clip here at the bottom is that the humans have anthropomorphized her, and they have attributed human tendencies to her, as well as Janet is programmed to have human thoughts and feelings, and she learns how to be human. So there is an attempt to murder Janet that is troubling and a bit funny. And this serves as a really ready example of how it is that technology is shaped by how humans think about the world and their social relationships, and essentially how how humans construct the meaning of technology. So there you have it, folks, a wee bit of review. How about you hit pause now, take a moment, watch these really great little clips, and then come join me again. Welcome back. I hope those clips were helpful for you to get a better sense with an example of how technological determinism and social constructivist theory look in sort of our cultural milieu. So they're funny clips. The reason why I wanted us to go back and address this difference in technological bias is that it's because it shapes how we think about what shapes technology and what forces control technology. Or is it the other way around? Is it technology that shapes human culture and human life? So what you're going to see here today is that technological determinism and social constructivist theory work into the central questions that we are looking at when we talk about the shape and control of technology in society. So you'll see here that technological determinism gets us to think about the questions about organizational structure in a very particular way. It also allows us to think about how entrepreneurs and technocrats use technology as a way to kind of continue social and technological innovation, but also control societies. On the other side, you can see how social constructivists would look at questions about how governments would shape technology, how democracies can shape technological innovation, and even how consumers shape technology. So we are going to be really working with these two biases and assumption ideologies as we make our way. So if you're needing a lodestar and you sort of get lost in the muddle of all the things that we're going to be talking about today, you can always come back to the central question: what do I believe that drives technological change and innovation? Is it the technological advancement of tools and the techniques, or is it the social contexts and meanings that humans use to make sense of the technologies? And by asking yourself this question, you'll come back to where you value the most, but also be able to see how these ideologies work to create a fuller picture of technology and its social impacts. So with that said, let's move forward. So I want to talk a little bit about organizational structure, because humans together in groups, there will always be some sort of organizational structure. There's a way that people naturally organize themselves in all situations. Pay attention in your daily life. And I know it's a little hard because we have to stay away from each other. But as you're going about maybe taking the bus or going to the grocery store, take a look at how the space is organized and where people are in this space. Who is being paid more to be in that space? Does technology create a division between people within that space? So what we are doing by this little thought exercise is evoking the sensibility to see organizational structure. And if we were to give it more of a formalized definition, organizational structures and processes are often influenced by technologies that they use. But there really isn't a strong relationship between the amount or type of technology and the organizational structure. So the central problem with using determinism here to make any particular arguments about how technology shapes organizational structures, the central problem is that it's really at best a weak correlation. just because there are so many variables to take into consideration. So things like shape, the size of the organization, the structural complexity of the organizational, as well as how many technologies and what kinds of technologies are being used. But a really ready way to sort of get at the difference in how technology can shape organizational structure is within the food service industry. So you can see here all of the busy people working at a McDonald's. And you can see how the technology and even the kind of invention of the fast food food assembly line has created the technology that then shapes how this workplace is organized and structured. You can compare that to this picture of the head chef and the owner of a very famous and prestigious restaurant. It's called Noma in Copenhagen. And you can see here that there is none of the McDonald's technology. In fact, it's just Renzepi with some big pots, and he looks very contemplative and like he's thinking up what exciting things to do next in his restaurant. And for here, the technology might be able to be said that it shapes how Renzepi and his restaurant works. There is significance of routines to an organization that stems from how the space is organized, and the kinds of activities that can be done by following these standardized procedures. So the general tendency is that technologies that reduce work to a preset kind of steps of routines are a good fit with formalized organizational structures. So McDonald's or Tim Hortons would be a really great example of how the technologies reduce the work of any one person to a very simple set of steps. And within that position, there are some very well articulated rules and clearly defined responsibilities and fixed lines of authority. In contrast, though, if one were to force routinization in Renzepi's kitchen by use of technology, it just would not work. This is a creative endeavor that this restaurant employs. So the routinization of employees and of processes is highly counterproductive to a restaurant like Noma. So does this help us answer the question of whether or not technology shapes organizational structures? Maybe, a little, in some cases. I do want to draw your attention to a very controversial application of more of the McDonald's routine structured way of dealing with a workplace. And you'll find these in many manufacturing processes and industries and production centers. It's called numerical control. I'm sure many of you know a lot more about this than I do. But in the context of talking about how technology shapes organizational structure, numerical control has its appeal because it allows managers to gain more control over the process of work, because it can do things like ensure that one machine does not produce more pieces at a certain time before, let's say, this machine here. So it allows a central manager to be able to control the output and the work process and procedures. And numerical control tools generally promised a reduction in the decision-making powers of workers. So it was poised to make things easier for the workers. And management then becomes no longer dependent on the operator of these machines. It was essentially a way to optimize the entire production layout. But of course, it's not without its detractors. And if you want to learn more, I highly suggest taking time now to pop on over to our notebook and take a look at this process video about numerical control technologies, as well as read through this important case study about the concept of scientific management. This case study will come up over and over again in conversations about technology, and especially today as we will be addressing kind of the role of technocracies in politics and in social life. So let's pause the video and take a look at this video and a read through some of these articles that I have laid out for you. And do take time to leave your comments about whether or not you are persuaded by the methods of scientific management, or do you find these criticisms listed in this article more convincing. So let's take a moment. I'll see you in a bit. Hi, welcome back. Now that you've taken an opportunity to learn a little bit more about numerical control technologies and Taylorism as two examples of how technology influences organizational structure, we can now ask a question going in the other direction in the favor of constructivists. Does organizational structure shape technology? Now, a constructivist would say, yes, absolutely. Organizationals can shape technological change through their ability to affect the supply and demand for a particular technology. So you can think here of how just the choices of a few firms can shape what sorts of cars that we drive, the way that steel is made, the operating systems that are used in our computers that we use every day, and even the links that we get to see when we do a simple web search. So what this tells us is that the structure of the organization can shape the use of particular technologies. And it can go so far that it can be said that technologies can be selected by an organization not because they're superior, but because they maintain configurations of power within the organization. And they can also maintain the structures of status quo. So that just means, adherence to tradition, or the way things are because they are, and there's no need to change them. So technology can be implicated in this way, argue the constructivists. And as we've talked about elsewhere in the course, who controls the tools and for what purposes also controls the flow of information and structure of the organization. This sounds a lot like technological paradox number one, that the person who controls the ability to understand or make a certain technology has the power. And organizational structure and technology works very similarly. So moving forward, so we've talked about organizational structure. I want to chat a little bit with you about the role of entrepreneurs and technocrats in technocracies. So organizations that function on routine tasks, so the McDonald's or the Tim Hortons that we were talking a little bit about earlier. So those organizations that function on routine tasks require the application of basic bureaucratic principles. And these bureaucratic principles are specialization, formalization, so this refers to the use of rules, regulations, and operating procedures, as well as a hierarchical structure of authority. But entrepreneurs are really unique in the sense that they need a lack of bureaucracy in order to be innovative and create the things that they create. Because let's face it, if you're bogged down in rules and formalization and a hierarchy of a direction of authority, then it's really hard to do something different and innovative, right? So entrepreneurs promote innovation that tends to be risky and push new ways of doing things that are uncomfortable for a bureaucratic system. But nonetheless, at times, these sorts of people and these sorts of things are needed in order for a firm or an industry to shake loose from its standard operating assumptions that prevent needed innovations to keep pace with consumer technological demands. So probably the most famous face of modern entrepreneurism is Mr. Elon Musk, who is one of the directors of Tesla, the automotive electric car company, SpaceX, and a whole bunch of other companies that he has helped create, including one for a for-purchase flamethrower. Not sure why anyone would need a flamethrower, but who am I to judge? So, yeah, I just wanted to sort of direct your attention to our notebook, where there is a section about technocracy and sort of the role that entrepreneurs play in technocratic movements. So in a few minutes, we're going to return to this as we make our way through the content to see how entrepreneurs and technocracies relate to one another and how they feed off of the need for a lack of bureaucracy. So, given the enormity of problems faced by citizens in the world, everything from climate change to loss of jobs in manufacturing industries or particular manufacturing industries, some of the solutions have been to use greater technology or use technology to better the lives of people who are suffering from very basic deprivations. So a lack of housing, lack of food security, or unstable political situations. So hand in hand with encouraging a culture of entrepreneurship tends to be the progressive thinking that technology, because it can make our life easier and more convenient, we can make the assumption, and we do make the assumption, that having progressive technologies can fix our social, political, and economic problems. And here's where we start to see the rise of the technocrat. So back to our notebook, I've included a section explaining what a technocracy looks like and who would be involved in that, as well as a quick little setup about the origins. But to give you a quick hit, technocracies began, this kind of movement began in the early 20th century, really about the mid-1930s in the United States, and over the course of the 20th and 21st century have spread worldwide. And this is because it is based on some assumptions about technology that, because technology can do so many great things to make our life convenient and just generally better, then why can't it be used to fix social, political, and economic problems? But as we've been learning and reflecting on in the course, technology does have a tendency to create alienation and disruption and discontinuity between people and their communities, as well as the products of their labor. So to promote technocracy is a bit of a dangerous argument or a formulative movement, because technocrats too ride some very dangerous waves into political life. It tends to be political populism that creates the conditions for further alienation and discontinuity. So I do have some examples of that in the section on technocratic movements. So there are 3 short little articles that you can read. One from a very respected journal called Foreign Policy, talking about the relationship between populism and technocrats. There's a riveting example about the Indian Prime Minister Modi, who is a technocrat by trade and is now one of the leaders of India, of modern India. So there's a really great piece there. And then, of course, a really alarmist but nonetheless interesting way of thinking about the dangers and the critiques of a technocratic emergence, given our service and data-driven industries that we see around the world right now. So 3 interesting pieces for you to take a look at as you consider technocracy. So you're welcome to pause and take a look at that now, or you can go back to that a little later. I'm going to keep moving forward if that's okay with you, but you could pause this at any time if this has captured your interest. So moving forward, I want to talk about how governments can shape our view of technology. And once again, we'll go to the notebook. And this time, I would like for you to participate in this Think Stop here that asks the question, share one example of how government actions have shaped the use and availability of a piece of technology. So I've included one that I recently came across in July, looking at the ways in which the Turkish government is passing legislation on social media companies like Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube as a way to gain greater accountability standards. So let's pause here, take a moment, and put in your comments in this little Think Stop while the idea is fresh on your mind. I'll see you in a minute. Hi again. Let's dive in, shall we? So we were talking about the ways in which governments can help shape the kinds of technologies available to a society. And as you can see here, there's a lot of different things that a government can do to either limit or encourage different kinds of technologies. So there could be everything from laws and regulations, being able to grant some funding to particular industries and areas, spending on research and development, so things especially related to military, medical, and space programs. Things like tax credits and deductions that can incentivize or de-incentivize human behavior. Funding particular institutions and their research, as well as granting access to patent rights. So there is a whole realm of things that governments do to encourage technological innovation and advancement, or, on the other side, to limit or restrict it. So one example of kind of the incentivizing and de-incentivizing that governments can do is with the environmental question about carbon tax. So currently, many states, including the government of Canada, have been crafting and working with ideas to create a system of a carbon tax. And you can learn more about carbon taxes more specifically in our case study in our notebook for this module. But what we need to know, and just as an example of how governments help us with these things, carbon tax is a way to de-incentivize manufacturers and consumers from consuming fossil fuels or emitting fossil fuels so wantonly because of its negative effects on the environment, and certainly things like air pollution, ozone layer depletion, and also running out of these particular forms of fuel. So what a tax on this would do is de-incentivize manufacturers and consumers from using products that emit or use fossil fuels, but also use the money gathered from the de-incentivizing tax to then incentivize people to consume more clean energy products and endorse companies that plan on using clean processes. So this is a ready example that we can see playing out in all sorts of countries around the world with some very positive benefits. And it's a conversation that we need to be having in our country, given the gravity of climate change and the government's role in being able to help support the consumer desire for a better, cleaner world. Moving on, there are, of course, a number of issues with government spending and support. In terms of what governments can do, it can often put corporations and even consumers in positions where they experience what are called externalities. And externalities can be positive or they can be negative. So in terms of a positive externality, this is a kind of consideration that is considered a benefit that occurs or is imposed upon a third party, so citizens, let's say, from an economic or policy activity. So an example of this is the government spending to support telecommunications companies who are putting in the frameworks for 5G network development, which will be the next generation of our telecom system networks, not only in Canada, but in most countries around the world. It's considered a positive externality because even though we as consumers and individuals are not paying directly into it, our tax dollars that it's collected by the government is being used in order to benefit widely everyone who is using telecoms in the state. So that is an example of a positive externality. There are negative externalities, unfortunately. And these sorts of externalities are a cost that is suffered by a third party, so it can be a citizen or some sort of consumer, as a consequence of an economic and or policy transaction. So here, an example of a negative externality could be the accidents that ensue from self-driving car errors. So again, government money is being lent to self-driving car manufacturers so that they can develop this technology and do research. But there are times where accidents will happen because it is a nascent technology, and people who are not directly not directly part of studying this technology are hurt. So a car accident is often just an accident. Something terrible happens and it's no fault. But the externality here with the self-driving car gets us to ask questions about accountability. whom is accountable for when a self-driving car creates a situation. So there are issues that government spending can involve in terms of these policy transactions and activities. One further problem is the free rider problem. And the free rider problem is a burden that stems from the use of a shared resource that is created, and it's used or sometimes overused by people who are not maintaining their fair share of that resource. So in other words, free riders are people who, and we see them all the time, I've seen it in my neighborhood, where rather than paying the television cable company for wiring their house to get their cable and paying, let's say, Rogers or Bell for the television service, they will wire it themselves in some very dangerous ways. I really should have included a picture of one of my favorites from the next street over, where the wire is kind of like hanging down in the middle of their driveway. So the free rider problem is an economic problem. It's considered a socioeconomic problem and a failure of the free market system. And the inequality of contribution makes this resource economically infeasible to produce and consequently create. Because if too many people, let's say, keeping on this example, are stealing cable, then companies won't want to either support or manufacture ways in which cable can be wired into our homes. So the free rider problem is a very serious socioeconomic problem that the government spends a good deal of time trying to figure out how much is too much and when to leave spending and support. So those are a few issues that will come up over and over again in our discussions about technology and the government's role in that. The next section that I briefly want to talk about is looking at how democracies shape technology. So governments are the sort of national, in-home way of ruling and governing a population. But democracies are bigger. They are networks and regions that all believe in the democratic ideals of good governments, elections, freedom of speech, and association, all the things that for many of us are really important parts of our socio-political lives. But technology does play a role in democracy. So it is a fair question to consider whether or not democracies shape technology. The success or failure of technologies often depends on the political support they receive. We see this quite often where, actually we're keeping on the topic of environmental activism and carbon tax, we are seeing, and this image of course was in the before time of the virus, where we could be together without masks and protesting on behalf of the environment. But the kind of political support that climate action has been receiving greatly plays a role in the kinds of technologies that we use in the future. Political support is also a reflection of the distribution of power within a society as well as in the government. So here again is the real power of the citizens to tell their government what it is that they want to be done with particular forms of technology. So a good example of this are the climate action protests against fracking. And fracking is a process of removing fossil fuels that disturbs the ground and can be done very close to residential and commercial areas. So of course the political action of climate activists becomes an expression of the political power of citizenry. And on the flip side, the fact that that fracking still exists as a practice in some parts of the country is an expression of the power of the government to be able to protect the industry and the workers of that industry so that they can continue to do this job. So there is a great deal of what is called technological passivity, and we all do it. I know I do it all the time. And most people, like myself, and probably you, are really happy just to consume the success of all these technological advances. But I don't necessarily want to pay more to have these advances. So I'm thinking here of things like 5G technology, and I'm a little worried about what my cable and internet bills are going to be like when it's 5G time. And while I will greatly enjoy the accessibility and the speed of all of these internet technologies, I don't necessarily want to pay more. So that is a definite problem for democracies in society. And finally, one point is, power is delegated by voters to others who have varying interests and agendas and allegiances. So what we tend to support and vote for oftentimes doesn't translate into what we truly want, which is why things like climate change and building green infrastructure has taken so long and will continue to take so long. In addition to that problem, there are a few other things that we should keep in mind that are limitations of democracies when dealing with technologies. And there are three here. One is called the do the people know better problem. The second is consumer choice paradox. And the third is that voting really is only a reaction. So let's go through these really quickly. So for the first issue, voters and people, citizens, tend to want to have positive change and have good things coming to them within a democracy. But that doesn't necessarily mean that they know better than the experts in the fields that they are trying to use the government to change through their voting pattern and support. And while it is always better to have more people engaging in technological decision-making, there is a risk that the balance and flow of power and bureaucratic processes can be tipped in favor of either managers, engineers, and bureaucrats, or with people who really don't know what it is that they are arguing for. They want the stuff. They're willing to pressure their government for something that they feel that they want, but they don't truly understand it. So it does play a bit on technological paradox number one here, that there is that conference of power that is favored by people who understand the technology, but finding that balance between people who are ignorant of the technology versus people who are knowledgeable about it is a real challenge within democratic ideologies. The second problem is consumer choice paradox. And the reality is that as consumers, we can only choose between existing alternative technologies. As much as we want to have green technologies, electric cars, and amazing things, that don't leave a huge carbon footprint, at the end of the day, we only can choose from what has been created and what has been innovated. There's no way to determine what alternatives will be available in the future. So that is a real limitation that frustrates consumers in democracies. So even if you voted or consumed products that are almost environmentally friendly, you still only have a range of alternative technologies to choose from until greater innovations have been made. The final one here is, the hard reality that voting only reacts to a situation. Elections are fought on a variety of issues that make up a candidate's platform. And technological issues are one of many parts of a platform. So even when a technological issue is the main focus, voters' choices are often heard after the technology is already in place. So if you were, let's say, someone who does not think that 5G technology is a good idea, and you wanted to use your voting power in a democracy to affect that change, the unfortunate reality is that people vote on all sorts of issues through their candidate, and the technological issue may not be the most important one. So the last piece before this video ends, and you could take a good long break and then come back and start lecture number 2 when you're ready, is building on this idea of consumer behavior in democracies, but let's focus now on just consumers. We consume technologies all day, all night, all the time. We always have. And our habits as consumers play a large role in shaping what is developed by tech firms. These tech firms study what we like doing, what we want to be doing, and they try their best to create products that we want to buy from them. The products that we use daily undergo careful research and design refinements and revolutions in order to maintain market profitability. So herein lies the problem, that even though consuming certain objects and certain technologies is driving a profit margin for a company, that doesn't necessarily mean that it is a beneficial product or technology in society. So you can consider here arguments made about social media platforms. And even though we love worldwide using social media, there are consumptive habits of people who use it to malign, to abuse, to do all sorts of terrible things to friends and strangers alike on this this form of technology. But people still consume it. And if there's a way for companies to make money off of even human suffering, that is what will happen. So this idea that consumers can change technology is a powerful one, but we do need to think carefully and try to understand its consequences and outcomes. And one little last point here is, we also need to consider here with consumer habits how much technological paradox number 1 relates to this. Consumers generally tend to know much less about how a technology is made and manufactured, but they're happy to consume it, which then still allows the power to be conferred on its manufacturer and designers and creators. So we still see that kind of tension between what consumers can do, but the limits of their knowledge about what they can do. So I'm going to leave it here. and call the end of this first video for our Module 2 lecture. So I hope you have a great day and not be too overwhelmed by all the neat things we're learning. Definitely take time to engage in our notebook. It will help you sort through all of these ideas that we're learning so far. And when you're ready, I will see you in video 2. All right, bye.